Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of us start approaching midlife, we begin to look on the horizon to find out one question. Are we going to be safe? Are we going to be secure? And certainly one thing is true. Are we going to outlive our money, or will our money outlive us? We try to find many strategies out there that will help us achieve the kind of goals that will allow us the lifestyle that we look forward to. But in a day and an age such as we live in with the electronic age, we find that there's a lot of volatility out there that just wasn't around 10 and 20 and 30 years ago. So the question is, what do we do? How do we get rid of those emotions that tell us fear and greed are the ways that are going to keep us from getting to where we want to be? Well, joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is a member of the American Association of Individual Investors. He is a self-taught investor. He writes to help others navigate the path to financial independence and a secure, comfortable retirement. He's a former mining engineer at a large consulting company. He was able to retire part-time status at the ripe old age of 49, and more recently at age 57 retired fully. His goal is to inform amateur investors like he was about better ways to invest to help them successfully reach retirement, sustain their finances, and enjoy a comfortable old age. His book is The Death of Buy and Hold, How Not to Outlive Your Money, Investing for and in Retirement. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program our guest, Chris Minucci. Chris, thank you for being on the program today.
Thank you very much for having me.
You know, this is probably one of those areas where there was a time in your life you thought to yourself, somebody must know more than I do, so why don't I go ahead and just put my money out there and hope whoever grabs a hold of it is somebody I can trust to do the right thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's where I started out initially. I think, partly due to some luck, it worked out okay for me, but I wouldn't want to recommend depending on luck as your basis for securing your retirement. You really want to try to educate yourself, at least to the point where you can evaluate a financial planner and whether he's right for you, and possibly to do it yourself, which I think is a viable option for many amateur investors.
Well, I think those amateur investors that we're talking about when it comes to educating themselves were those that wish they would have done so when Enron was still a company, huh?
Yeah, and I think that's true. It's true for me. I wish I had started earlier. Everyone's going to have that regret, but that shouldn't stop you from, getting going right now. You can't make up for the time that you've lost, but you can certainly make a lot of progress by, just diving in and starting to do what you should have been doing maybe 10 or 20 years ago. But it's never too late.
Now, here's a couple of things I want to talk about. First of all, The Death of Buy and Hold is a pretty extensive book. So talk about how you decided to put it together the way that you have.
Okay, what I did was I kind of focused in the first half of the book on investing, and in particular on reducing the two risks that you face when you invest. Both of these risks, in turn, put you at danger of outliving your money. But there's two very different ways that can happen. One way is, as you mentioned in the introduction, and I think you put it very well, it's volatility. If you experience enough volatility, especially early in your retirement, that can cause you to go broke down the line. And then the second way is by not earning enough returns to keep up with inflation. And that's really what the entire book is about. The first part of the book explains how to avoid these risks, which ultimately can lead to your going broke through investing. The second half of the book focuses on more practical aspects and brings in a lot of the ideas from retirement planning that also can help you to reduce these risks.
Now, it's interesting because you bring up one thing for sure that a lot of people probably don't take into account when they're trying to figure out, well, what is my rate of return on my money? But the truth is, they don't take into account sometimes the rate of inflation. I mean, you take a look at what $10 buys today versus what it bought 20 and 30 years ago. It's quite a different ballgame, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And if you look at what inflation has done over the long term, it's been roughly every 24 years or so, it has reduced your purchasing power in half. So if you have $100,000 out there in retirement accounts right now, you have to consider that 24 years from now, if that money hasn't grown to keep up with inflation, if you, for example, left it in, a money market fund or a CD that, at least these days is earning 0%, you're going to see, that nest egg reduced in half in terms of what it can actually purchase. Mm-hmm. So it's a very powerful negative. Inflation is a very powerful negative factor that you have to plan for.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other big thing, too, because we're getting older, we face, although we're certainly living longer, the idea of how much health care is going to be costing you.
Yes. That's really tricky. And the only, there are numbers that have been put out there. I think Fidelity has made an estimate that it's roughly, over the lifespan of a retiree, it might be as much as $250,000. But the fact is, it's going to be extremely variable from one person to the next. Some people, might need a lot of long-term care as they grow older. Others might not. But it's something that is, it's like a complete uncertainty bogey, and the best you can do to deal with it is to make sure that you are growing your assets at a good clip. Really you want to be doing better than the rate of inflation because, a lot of these medical expenses, long-term care expenses, they grow actually faster than the rate of inflation. So the best way to get yourself prepared for that is to make sure that you're really, that you're earning sufficient returns to beat inflation. Mm-hmm. And to do that, you have to be invested in the stock market, at least to some extent.
Now, I've got to let you know, Chris, we've talked about this on our program, obviously Beyond 50 over the years many, many times. And, there seems to be some very consistent things that guests such as yourself come on and talk about when it comes to investing. And one of the biggest ones, as you mentioned earlier, is that people really don't take the time to really come in and look into this and read about it and study it. It's amazing how many people will spend, just ungodly amounts of time researching a great deal on a new car, maybe, a great way to buy a house to get in with the best amount, a little amount of money, whatever the case is. And they'll research those kinds of things to death, but these are expenditures, that come out of pocket. As Robert Kiyosaki of Rich Dad, Poor Dad would say, well, a car is a doodad. It doesn't really make you any money unless you're investing in, it to deliver something and to make you money back. Well, we spend a lot of time finding ways to save money to get the best value we can for our dollar, but when it comes to something like investing, we just kind of walk away thinking, the language is just too complicated. But the truth is, and you certainly say this so eloquently in your book, it's not as complicated as you make believe that it is.
That's very true, Daniel. And I think, it can be a scary thing when you're first starting out to begin to learn about it. But what I would strongly argue is that you don't need, some finance background, MBA from Harvard, or anything like that to be a successful investor. It's really not that difficult. And in fact, it takes a lot more hard work and effort to be a bad investor than to be a good investor. And here's why. The bad investor thinks that they can predict the future. So they'll try to pick out particular investments that are going to do well over the next few weeks or the next few months. Or they'll try to figure out when the market's trend will reverse itself. Well, trying to predict the future is a lot of work, and it usually doesn't go well in the end. A good investor starts with the knowledge that you can't predict the future and doesn't even try to predict the future. And instead, they'll buy a well-diversified, all-weather portfolio that will hold up regardless of what the future might bring. And once that person's bought it, all they'll do is hold it. Buying and holding a diversified portfolio is the best strategy for investors who know they can't predict the future. It doesn't take an MBA from Harvard to do it. It's really not that difficult. And, you know, I mean, I'm basically a lazy person myself. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm so attracted to investing, because the whole point of investing for retirement is to put your money to work for you so you won't have to work anymore. Mm-hmm. If you're working hard at investing, you're not doing it right. Mm-hmm. But you know, just a little bit of education up front, and I think the vast majority of people could take this on.
Now, we're in such a changed landscape now where technology is beginning to basically emerge in ways where it's allowing people opportunities to give their creative capital, if you will, and in return the possibility of great financial returns are available for people of almost all ages. You know, you take a look at, for instance, the YouTube channel. You could actually take and create things on YouTube, you know, little videos if you want to. You can begin to monetize these things, and it's amazing some of the kinds of income people are actually making from doing something like this. In a lot of cases, passive income, you know, because over time these things grow, your subscribers grow, and the next thing you know, you're beginning to see a passive income and other opportunities that you didn't have before. And I think when I think of investing, and I believe that probably a lot of our listeners may feel the same way too, they think of something that they put money down, they wait for a while, then they begin to see this money begin to grow, and then at the end there's this nest egg and all this money that may be available for them depending on what their goal is. But they never take a look at it from a passive income point of view, and it sounds to me, and it's certainly in your book, that's what you talk quite a bit about, the importance of understanding what passive income is. And if you do understand that, it really changes the ball game, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, Daniel. I think you know, really what I recommend is, you know, putting your money in a portfolio that's an all-weather portfolio, very well diversified, and then sitting back and essentially leaving it alone and letting it grow over the long term. You know, over the long term, the stock market has averaged roughly 10% returns. If you just leave it alone and don't try to, you know, time the market, try to pick the hot stocks or the hot sectors or the hot mutual funds today, you will do much better than if you try to do all of those, you know, manipulations of your portfolio.
Mm-hmm. Well, it also sounds to me, Chris, that what you're saying is one of the number one rules when it comes to investing is don't get emotional.
Yes, absolutely. You know, as I say in the book, you know, there may be, you know, certain situations where following your heart is better than following your head, but that is absolutely not the case in investing. And in investing, you really have to come to terms with your emotions and make sure that you have control over them, make sure that you're not making decisions, and the two big ones are fear and greed. Mm-hmm. Make sure you're not making decisions based on those two emotions. And that's really the most difficult part of investing. Once you've figured out the mental aspects to it, which aren't that difficult, it's really comes all down to controlling your emotions.
Well, that's certainly the tactics that Harvard MBA you talk about use quite frequently when it gets people to try to decide how to make investments, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And you got to be careful about that too.
Now, here's something that I don't see too often in investment books, and that is you talk about currency diversification. Describe the importance of what that is when it comes to investing.
Okay. What you want to be able to do is to diversify across the entire globe. You want to have investments in developed markets. You want to have investments in emerging markets. And there's actually a couple of reasons for that. One is, the United States has been a tremendous growth economy, over the past century, and has really outdone, all the other markets that are out there. But you don't want to assume that will always be the case in the future. We hope it will be. That there are certainly some reasons to expect it to continue, but you always want to hedge your bets. As I say, you always want to plan for the worst while hoping for the best. So one of the reasons you want to be diversified into foreign markets is because, maybe things won't go as well for the United States economy in the next 100 years as was the case in the last 100 years. And then the second thing is you are then taking advantage of different moves in currencies, and this kind of comes back to the same idea. But if the United States for some reason hits snags that harm us, one could be a growing, exploding U.S. debt. Then it's entirely conceivable that the dollar won't do as well as other currencies out there. And when you invest in these foreign markets, you get diversification into the euro, you get diversification into the yen, and you get diversification into more exotic currencies like the yuan, and that. It's just another way to hedge your bets. Mm-hmm. Hopefully the dollar will continue to do great, but if not, you've got some hedging in there.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's an interesting way to look at it because the title of your book is "The Death of Buy and Hold," which basically, to me, describes, just don't put it all in one area. Try to find ways because this way may be growing slower, maybe not at all, so this way over here actually can help offset that potential loss or just that steadiness where it's not doing anything. But describe for our listeners, if you can, what it means to have an all-weather portfolio. What's included in something like that?
Okay. What I recommend is 4 different, I'm going to call them types of investments, because they're not exactly asset classes. They're types of investments. The first type of investment is, what would typically just be the core holding for most investors, which is large cap stocks. And this will include U.S. as well as international large cap stocks, so stocks of large companies. Now, what you then want to do is, recognize that, large cap stocks have done, beautifully over the long-term past, about 10% returns. but they are extremely volatile. And there have been times when, over short periods, you can lose, 50% of more of your money in large cap stocks. And, that happened back in 2008, 2009. So the next thing you want to do is hedge that core holding so you are not quite as exposed to volatility as you would be. And there's two ways to do that. One way is with bonds, and I certainly recommend bonds as another type of investment that you want to have in there. Bonds reduce volatility mainly because they are low in volatility themselves. So you put in some low volatility bonds to your portfolio with some high volatility large caps, and it averages out to something in between the two of them. And that's a good way to do it. But you have to recognize that when you invest in bonds, you are compromising your long-term returns. Okay? And so going back to, these two ways that you can wind up going broke in retirement, one way is too much volatility, the other way is earning not enough returns to keep up with inflation. The more you put into bonds, the greater that second risk becomes. So there's another way to reduce volatility, and that other way is by investing in highly volatile investments that tend to go up when the stock market goes down. And you actually, in this case, want them to be highly volatile because the more volatile they are, the greater the chances that they'll really shoot up when the market is going down. And then finally, the fourth type of investment is what I call return boosters. And these are investments that can actually do better, at least in the long run, have done better than large cap stocks. And these are things like small cap stocks and value stocks. And they can help you to avoid that second way of going broke, not earning enough returns to keep up with inflation. And so you want to find a blend of all four of these types of investments in your portfolio.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing, too, is you talk about hedging your bets, so to speak, is that people don't tend to look toward the arena of necessary insurance coverage. And that's very important, as you talk about in your book.
Yeah, it is, because, we've talked about two of the ways you can go broke in retirement, right? There is, this too much volatility and not enough returns to keep up with inflation. And those are what I refer to as the investment-related risks. But there's also other ways that you can go broke in retirement. We touched on one of them before, and that's medical costs. They can, come at you from, blue skies, and, really, they can, they can be so large that you literally don't have enough money to deal with them. So you need to have insurance mainly to deal with these large unexpected costs. It could be medical, it could be, someone suing you, for whatever, so you need to be protected with homeowners insurance, probably with liability insurance. For those long-term care costs, you really want to, find a long-term care policy, and one that will, let you stay in your home. You have to be insured to deal with this non-investment risk that can break you, these large unexpected expenses.
Now, the other thing too, though, is the changing landscape that each time we seem to elect a new president, then Congress gets together, and there are all these interesting little things that begin to happen behind closed doors that come out in the guise in public relations as something much different than what it seems to be. Let's talk about, for instance, the Obama Health Care Act. And you said, that's one of those things that you kind of scratch your head realizing there's a lot of intricacies there and trying to understand exactly what that is. So tell us about the Affordable Care Act and how something like that comes in and kind of changes things for people who are investing.
Okay, well, it depends in part, obviously on your age. I mean, if you're over 65, it's not going to have an impact on you. You're going to be in Medicare. If you're, younger than 65, but employed with an employer who has medical insurance for you, it's a non-issue. It's really for people who either are working but they don't get insurance, or my own case, if you've retired early and you're not yet eligible for Medicare and you don't have an employer to get medical insurance from. And it's really been a tremendous help for both of those sets of people. First of all, because it could literally be unaffordable prior to the passage of the Affordable Care Act. But now, it really is affordable because of the government subsidies, and it's actually made early retirement much more feasible for a lot more people. So from that perspective, there are winners and there are losers, but people who are early retirees, people who need that insurance, basically it's been a tremendous help for. That said, there are these risks out there associated with the Affordable Care Act. One of them is the current Supreme Court case, King versus Burwell. Depending on whether the court rules with the government or against the government, if they rule against the government, then subsidies will no longer be paid to people living in the states that use the federal exchange. And it's, most of the experts predict that if that happens, premiums will skyrocket. And so, affordable care may become unaffordable. But, if the court rules in favor of the government, then it's fine. It'll continue on as it is.
Well, what specifically is going on with that court case that perhaps our listeners should come to know?
Well, I mean, the only thing that you can really, I'm not a legal expert. I don't.
No,
really
we're not asking you to be a legal expert. It's just it's one of those things. See, it's just like I was mentioning, before I talked about the Affordable Health Care Act, is that there seems to be laws that come into place when somebody goes in to be elected about ways they believe they are fixing things. And healthcare has been a monstrosity in America for who knows how long. Right. And nobody has ever really come up with a reasonable solution that hasn't benefited more than just insurance companies. Yeah. We're going to make this a law, so insurance companies are getting wet thinking to themselves, geez, now they have to buy insurance. Let's see what we can do. I mean, it started with requiring drivers, at least in the state that I live in, you're required to have insurance to drive a car. So what does that do? Well, they really try sticking it to you in premiums because there's really nothing you can do about it. And these are the kinds of things I'm talking about. So without being a legal expert, what's going on with this court case here that you were describing?
Well, the one thing that everyone should be aware of is the decision is expected in June. Okay. So, up until June, nothing's going to happen. After June, if the court rules in favor of the government, nothing is going to happen. If the court rules against the government, then, there's different possibilities as to when, that ruling will be implemented. It might be the case that the subsidies go away essentially immediately. The government just stops sending checks out to the insurance companies. You will no longer get your subsidy, and premiums will begin. Well, premiums won't start rising until the subsequent year, but you won't get your subsidies right away in for the remainder of 2015. One, I think it was Justice Alito raised the possibility that maybe the court would delay, assuming that they ruled against the government, that they would delay implementation of that ruling until the beginning of 2016. But there's a relatively short window between when this ruling comes down and when it will actually take hold. And it's basically either in the middle of 2015 or maybe as late as early 2016. And I guess the second thing is, reading, people who do follow the Supreme Court, the consensus seems to be, like a lot of, the major Supreme Court cases these days, it's going to be a close vote. And they really have identified two possible swing votes. The one is Chief Justice Roberts, and the other one is Justice Kennedy. And so, if we knew what those two guys were thinking, we could predict what's going to happen, but, who knows?
Well, nothing like being the dealer of a blackjack table, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
But no, I guess my question was, what is this court thing all about?
Okay.
Yeah, that's really what my question was.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So it's literally about 4 words in the Affordable Care Act, which those 4 words basically say that you are eligible for premium subsidies when you use the state exchanges.
Okay.
They do not explicitly say that they don't explicitly include the federal exchanges in that statement. So a literal reading of the act says basically that if you live in a state that relies on the federal exchange, then you are not eligible for the subsidies. Now that's the literal ruling. A lot of people have argued that that may be the literal ruling, but that was clearly not the intention of Congress to limit the subsidies only to the state exchanges. That they did want the federal exchange to be included, and that interpretation is certainly the one that the IRS used in setting up, the subsidies and the tax credits. So that's really what the case is about, and it's about, do you read the language literally as it's there, or do you, interpret, what Congress's intent was in drawing up the act.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Now, the IRS brings us to, I think, one of the final things that people really need to consider is that's tax liability.
Yeah.
Okay, we stayed ahead of inflation. We see that we're growing at an interesting rate of return, but boy, I'll tell you, that tax on the back end when it comes to withdrawing and using your money can be something that can really kill, or as they would say, really kill the buzz, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. A few years back, I took a night class on retirement planning, and my instructor, he had a colorful way of explaining 2 big risks that we all face as investors. He said that there's a night thief and a day thief. The night thief is inflation. The night thief comes in the middle of the night and he raises up all the prices of everything that you want and need. The day thief is the tax man, and you have to be worried about both of those things.
I remember years ago, as I got involved in insurance, that they were advocating at the time it was buy term insurance and invest the difference. This is life insurance. Why would you go and buy into these policies that have a savings plan? But as I began to read many years later about why those were created, it started making a lot of sense about all the protections that these, I guess, call them whole life or life savings with a plan programs really have when it comes to alleviating a lot of the tax liability. For instance, I had a guy sitting in front of me saying, well, if this is your own money that you're putting into this policy to save, why do they charge you when you take it out? As if you're
Right.
borrowing your own money. But as I came to understand, well, there's a reason you're borrowing your own money. It's a lot cheaper to borrow your own money at 8% than it is to basically pay taxes at 30+% to the government. That's the first thing. The second thing is you're borrowing your own money, which means you intend on paying yourself back. I think that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, it is, and it's not just from that standpoint of borrowing from the policy, but also, when the policyholder dies, at least in my state, life, the payoff from life insurance is the one thing that doesn't get hit with an inheritance tax.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another.
The death tax, as Warren Buffett would call it. Yeah. It's really such fascinating stuff because, as you read into some of these things, you kind of wonder, why are people so hip on 401ks and IRAs when these are government-sponsored investment programs? In other words, they make the rules on what happens to your money.
True. But certainly there's, they're better than nothing in terms of taxes, right? Because at the very least, you get to defer your taxes, and the more you defer them, the better off you are. And now with Roth IRAs and Roth 401ks coming in, you have the potential for tax-free withdrawals in the future, and I think that they're really a great thing to have.
It's such a fascinating topic, but as we were saying earlier in the program, it's not one that's overly complicated. It may take a little bit of homework, but, as one investor had once told me, he says, well, you can go out and you can get great advice from people, but he says that's the biggest risk is depending on how much you actually spend for that advice, because you truly get what you pay for.
That's true. And if you're inclined towards the do-it-yourself approach, you may be able to get all the advice you need for buying a few $20 books. And if I could, Daniel, I just put out a couple of recommendations, not just for my own book, but two other authors that I would really highly recommend anyone who's considering learning more about investing. One of them is Burton McKeel. He wrote Random Walk Down Wall Street, which is really considered, a classic book on investing. It's been through, I don't know, how many different editions, but many. And the other one is by William Bernstein, The Four Pillars of Investing, and he's really a great writer as well. And what I would say about both those books is that they're not only, very educational, very informative, and will get you in the right direction, but they're also very entertaining. That they're both really good writers, and so they're really nice to read. Of course, in addition to my own book.
Well, and the truth is, Chris, as we've stated over and over, there's no reason. Everything has risk to it. But the question is, how are you learning to manage that risk? And as you begin to learn to do this, then you begin alleviating a lot of the fear that tends to be created out there that causes people to make spontaneous decisions at times they normally wouldn't make.
Yes. I think that's absolutely true. The more you learn, the less you will be swayed by emotion. and that's really important.
The Death of Buy and Hold is the book. Our guest joining us on the Beyond 50 radio program, Chris Minucci. Chris, is there a website people can find out more about?
Yes. You can visit my website, which is noworriesretirement.com. That's noworriesretirement.com. You can also look at my my book page on Amazon.com.
Very good. Chris, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program and enlightening our people to realize, do the homework, do the homework, do the homework.
Thank you for having me, Dan. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. You can also find out more about what we are doing and what we're showcasing, and also find out more about the Death of Buy and Hold. Visit us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. And we also encourage you to follow us at Twitter, our handle at Beyond 50 Radio. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.